Hello, everybody. This is Bill from SITREP Podcast, and this is part 3 of the War Without Hate painting video series. We're in the final stages of painting up both miniatures, the German soldier and the British soldier, using winter desert uniforms. So right here I have the German soldier, and I'm just touching up the helmet where the black strap I painted a little over the actual strap itself, so the definition. So I'm cleaning up any overpaint here. I looked at the comparison video of Warlord Games versus what I'm doing, and their strap was painted like a brown leather. I felt in this case black leather would be better, just for contrast and definition, since we already had some brown elsewhere. I did use some brown on the leather parts where the lenses fit in, but I figured I just wanted to go and do some touch up here and continue on with a black band and the tan helmet. So as you can see, I'm really painting using very thinned paints, so it's going to take a couple different layers to start painting in that overpaint there. So I'm just going through this very gently and just cleaning up spots I see. And just about finished there, and we'll be moving on shortly to the next step. Looks pretty good so far, doesn't it? Not too bad if I do say so myself. So I'm also looking at his skin tones and other things there that we might have to work on. So now I've decided to move on to that kerchief he has around his neck, and in the product picture they painted it like a red and white. I figured I'm just going to paint it a red kerchief, so I'm using a contrast red from the Citadel paint collection and just giving it a nice even coat of this red color that stands out, but it's not overly bright, so it does add a little bit of nice contrast. So again, I'm using a Gen Con series Games of Gear brush. I'm using the 0 brush. I decided to move away from the 1 and go down to a 0. It doesn't look too bad so far, so it adds a little nice definition and contrast there, and a little bit of like a personal touch, if you will. Even though most modern combat, everything's in greens and browns and camos and things, even in World War II, you had your browns and your olive drabs and some grays. Everybody once in a while had a little bit of a flair and put in a little bit of personal touch. So we figured, why not? Let's give this guy a little bit of a red kerchief here, kind of like you would give, to block out sandstorms and things like that. So we're just about finishing. I'm just checking and make sure I'm getting the clean lines as we need to do. And it looks pretty good. I'm very excited about these minis. I think they turned out really well. And as we go further on, I'll talk to you about when I decided to use nun oil on them. And I thought that was actually, after looking back at it, I think it was a big mistake to use that much nun oil, but I'll talk about that here. So right now I'm just finishing up some skin tones and highlights on the British soldier. And I'm just highlighting those high spots with a lighter color of flesh. Actually, it's almost a white. I've really gone with a light color to contrast in. But it's really nice when you have a nice detailed miniature to pick up some of those details and stand out, so it goes from there. So again, just going over some of the highlighted areas with a lighter tone just to make everything pop. Take your time, thin out your paints, get a good brush with a nice tip on it. I think it's getting close to where I'm going to need new brushes. These brushes are probably 5-6 years old now, some of these, and they do wear out eventually. I'm going to put them in some conditioning and we'll see if that helps bring them out. So, because after a while the bristles start getting a little loose. Now I'm just highlighting again on their trench coats or overcoats, if you will. So I've gone with the base color, and I've added a little bit of very light, I believe it was beige, to it to bring out a higher highlight there, and just going along all the edges and the high spots. If I found a high definition area with a real sharp edge, I try to be a little bit more, instead of blending it, it's a very hard line, if you will, almost. So I'm just looking at where light would strike the miniature and putting the highlights in there. As you can see, it's really coming along nicely. It's a lovely miniature to paint. Not too bad at all. Again, I'm just going over the collars and things like that to get all those highlighted areas. Take your time and think about where light would hit the miniature, and just, again, thin paint, and then just kind of start blending in those areas a little bit. And it'll come out nicely, as you can see here. And again, I'm just going over some very thin coats and build up your layers. You know, don't try and put on thick layers, otherwise they'll get very chalky or blocky. And you want it to, you know, blend in well and look like it's got some good definition to it without like just being layered and caked on. So take your time. That's the whole thing. You just got to take your time, think about where you're putting the paint, how much paint to put down, and then just go from there. Definitely got to work on the camera angles. I apologize, you know, trying different things. Today I did not use my phone. I actually used a Logitech webcam. I thought that might be a little easier because it's a little smaller to manage, and I actually believe the cell phone did much better video quality, to be honest with you. Just got to come up with a better rig. Actually, what I need to do is redesign the whole hobby room so it's better suited to film hobby projects like this. I like put the table in the center of the room and have cameras over on a different angle and with a black backdrop, and get all this excess stuff off the work table so you can just concentrate on the project at hand. It makes the camera less harder to work to focus in on. So, but looking pretty good, if I do say so myself. And now I'm working on the inside the uniform, trying to bring out some definition to the inside of the uniform. I did notice later on in the video when I did this, I totally forgot that he was wearing shorts, and I forgot to paint his legs flesh. So I try and go back over that after the fact, later. I just got distracted at one point, I think, and I was trying to get this video done. And, you know, again, it just goes to prove, take your time when you're doing this, and you won't mess up on little things like that. So, all in all, I think I was able to putting it all together, but I probably could have done a better job. But eventually, you know, when you're trying to create a video, and I don't know how many people out there try to do a painting video like this, when you're really going to town on something, you know, you want to try and keep it easy. Now, if you look at my brush on the ferrule, I had a huge water drop. I missed on that. I think I have that happen a couple times where I didn't dry my brush off well enough, and it really, you know, dampened. So what I'm trying to do is do some wet blending, try and smooth out the highlights again to make it look more natural than black. Alright, so I'm using some basilicum gray, and I'm actually using this for the metals. Instead of using like a gunmetal gray or some metallic, I'm actually using this gray to come out, and then we'll highlight it. So again, you can see the water droplet on my ferrule there. I gotta be really more cognizant of that. So I'm thinking about where the metal would be on this rifle. I'm assuming it's some kind of Mauser German rifle. So I'm trying to think where it is. On the rifle itself, where the bolt action would be, I don't know if I got some glue there or if it was a miscast, but it wasn't very well defined, so I tried to just paint it up, an indication of where it would be. So again, just thinking about where the metal is and going from there. take your time. Think about what it is you're trying to tell in your story, and look at reference material if you need to, and you'll be grand. Yeah, as you can see, this web camera, it really had a narrow field. And again, since I couldn't see the screen, it was hard to see what was going on. So just work through it, and you'll be okay. And there I'm painting up the hardware, the buckles on the strap. And now I'm using the same color, and I'm getting his bread tin, ammo tin, that cylinder there, and I'm just giving it a thin, very thin coat as well. It's coming along nicely. So we move on to the British soldier, and we're doing the same thing, same gray. Putting a thin layer on his bayonet. And you look how his colors are standing out right now, and everything looks very crisp, and the colors actually look like they blend well. Skin tones look great. You know, I talked at one point about I like to put on a layer of nun oil to bring out definition. Well, I've decided or learned in this video, as you'll see at the end, nun oil is not the be-all end-all, and sometimes it has to be used very judiciously, or barely used at all, because I think it really muddied my models at the end. Instead of having these really nice colors, I think it really did a number, especially like on flesh. And I don't know what drove me to paint his flesh with the nun oil, but I ended up going down that road, and you'll see the result. But I mean, for what I was able to do, it looks okay. So I'm bringing in some flesh wash right now, so it's more of an amber or reddish brown tone, and it really helped define the material, the paints here, the flesh, the fingers, the nose. So I should have just left it at that. As I've told people in the past, make sure when you get to a point, you just stop. You know, don't keep thinking, oh, I can do more and I can do more and I can do more, because eventually you'll screw it up. And so not only is this a how-to paint video, it's a how-to not paint video. You know, we all have our moments. So gonna do the same thing with the British soldier here. You can see how well he looks now. The flesh tones look standing out real nice, and that flesh wash really helps bring in some depth. I should have left it just at that. I can kick myself for what I do to him later. And you can see all the nice engraving, or sculpting, I should say, in the hands and the face of this British soldier. Really nice miniature. And I'm just reviewing and seeing if there's something else I could be doing, but I think I got it. So I bring him back up, and I believe this is where I'm painting his knit cap. Yes. So as you can see, I'm adding a little bit of green. I could have painted that black as an offset, but I'm using like olive drab or Russian green from the Team Yankee paint series, just to make it like a green knit cap. So now I'm back to the German soldier, and I'm not sure what step I'm going to take. So you're watching this with me as I voice over, because the original voice track was really spotty, and I did a lot of editing to cut down on a lot of dead time. So as we watch this together, I'm telling you what I've done. And it's nice to be able to go back and review your work. So, this is right. I'm using Kador Red highlight. It's almost a yellow. This is a P3 paint from Privateer Press. It's part of the War Machine paint sets, and it really does offset some of the red. I think here, though, it was a little too bright, but it did add some nice edging definition to his scarf. So I'm using the Army Painter detail brush that I had laying around. I haven't never really used it, so I thought I'd give it a try. It came in my Mega paint set. I got the Army Painter Mega paint set, the one that included every paint color they produced at the time of releasing that set. So I picked up one of those, and here we go. So again, I'm just lightly touching the edges of his kerchief or scarf to bring out some highlight. And now I'm painting his cigarette. I'm using an off-white, and I almost painted part of his face or finger there, so I'm going back over it. And just to bring out the detail on it. There we go. And I'll do the same to the German soldier as well. And just using the tip of the brush and just working it gently and going from there. So now I'm highlighting with a off gray to highlight the metallic highlights instead of using again a non-metallic or metallic metal. I'm just going with different shades of grays to bring out those highlights on his weapon. So I'm just going over the areas where I believe the metal would kind of reflect light versus absorb light, and just highlighting the buckles of the sling. And you can see right there I'm doing the one buckle on the sling at the base of the rifle at the butt, and then the one at the barrel. And then just examining. Now I'm going to highlight his meal container, weapons container, whatever the official term is for that metal cylinder that the German soldiers carried. I believe it carried their meals and other items in there. So again, I'm just using this off gray to highlight this color here, or to bring in some highlights to the metal. Just looking around the miniature, making sure I'm not missing something, and looking from there. And then I'll go to the British soldier, and I'll use the same off gray color to highlight the metal on his bayonet as well as his rifle. So I'm just doing the edging here so you can see. And just doing small strokes. Again, not heavy on the paint, just very light. Just to bring out some definition and edging. And then again on to the rifle itself, which has an upper and lower wooden cover over the barrel. So it's just the receiver itself. And then just the end of the barrel, and then some hardware in the buckles. And then he's got a buckle on his blouse under his greatcoat, so I'm using that same gray color to bring out that highlights in the metal there as well. And then again, just surveying. And then I decided I'm going to use that same gray to do the lenses on the German soldiers' goggles. I always thought about using like a color changing, if you will, paint from Turbo Dork paints, but I thought that'd just be too bright or too colorful, and it just wouldn't fit right into this miniature. So I went with this gray to highlight the lenses. And then I'm going to switch over to a brown to highlight the leather strap, or not the leather strap, but the actual leather rings of the goggles to make them stand out better. So as you can see, I'm just going over those areas and trying to use a very fine edge of the brush because it is a very narrow field to paint on. But as you can see, it's coming along nicely. You just got to be very patient and very careful and go from there. And then just painting it up and finishing out the edging on those goggles. Not too bad. Looks good. So move on to the next stage. So here comes the disaster. I'm using Games and Gear Synthetic Ichiban number 3 brush to do the nun oil. I should not have done the nun oil. I'm going to say that right now. I do prefer using nun oil on a lot of things. I should have been very stingy with the nun oil, but as you can see, I went so heavy-handed with it that it totally ruined the paint job. I think I should have just left them as they were. They were edge fine. It looked great, and now I just totally destroyed these models. Typically, I get really good results using nun oil on some, but I did such a good job of blending in the colors with the highlights and the shadows without the nun oil that I really didn't need to do this. And you know, I fell back on something I was comfortable with instead of, you know, leaving it as it was, and it really muddied the miniatures. So as you can see, it's just going to totally destroy them. So I move on to the the German soldier, and again, I go ahead and lap down a big old puddle of nun oil, and for some reason I decided not to do the flesh on him, which I think I probably discovered after the last miniature where I just smothered him in it. I'm like, nope, I don't want to do that, because, oh, well, no, I take it back. I did it anyways, as you can see. So, unless I just did his scarf, I have to look when we turn it back around. So, yeah, now I'm just taking the dry brush and pulling up the excess oil where it had puddled. So, no, I did not. I just did his scarf. I did not cover him, which I learned from my first mistake on the British soldier, unfortunately, but you can see I still got his chin from that big old brush. And then I'm going back here, and this is where I remembered, oh crap, those are legs, and I needed to put flesh tone on it, but I had already nun oiled them. So I started using some flesh paint, very thin, putting in there, figuring that maybe I could save that. So I do several coats, and we go from there. So just, again, thin coats, and now I'm trying to redo his face and his hands, because, you know, it's very, very dark, obviously, from the nun oil. So guys, nun oil or washes can be your friend, or they can be your worst enemy. I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest with you. I know better, and I just got a little crazy and heavy-handed, was distracted by something. I don't know if I was just monitoring the recording and just didn't think about what I did. So I fixed up the flesh here, and now I'm looking where I'm going to place the minis. I super glued them in place, and I use that activator. It's an aerosol activator. You can get off of Amazon. It works amazingly well versus some of that other activator. So I'm now doing the terrain on the base here, and I normally use like PVA glue and some spackling compound to bring terrain out, but I've seen many people do super glue for adhering things, and this is a gel, so it will give us some definition. You know, it won't be just perfectly flat. So I put a good coating of this super glue gel on there, and then I'm taking my fine grit sand and just dumping it on there. I got the cover underneath the handle there to pick up most of it, and I spread it on, thinking that a lot of it will stick to the super glue, but it didn't stick as well as I thought it would. You know, obviously you have to tamp it down, so I'm here just picking up items, and see, as you can see, it just doesn't want to stick. So I put a little extra glue here. With the PVA glue, I don't have these problems, and I can touch it and tamp it down without worrying about my finger sticking to the model or the base. So I personally will not be using super glue in the future for basing. I don't like the workability of it. I like the PVA, and I prefer it. So I will use PVA and compounds. So here I'm saturating what's already on there, so it adheres, and then I'm like, okay, no problem. I will go with, you know, terrain's not perfect, terrain's not even. There are bare spots, there's vegetation spots, and, you know, there's different things. Let's make the best of this. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and use a bigger grit on this. So I get my bigger grit there, and I get some more of this gel glue, and I find some of the bare spots, or where I think, you know, they're out in the middle of this desert here. You know, it's not totally sand. You know, there were rocky outcroppings and things like that. So again, I'm just using some heavier or bigger grains grit rocks, and you can see they're pretty, you know, similar in color, and it's all looking monocolor, but don't worry, we'll fix that. So I just lay them on there and I start tamping them down, because I know with the bigger ones I have more of a barrier between my finger and the super glue, so I'm able to tamp that down better than the other stuff. And I know else that I'm going to fix it. And you can see up too close with the spray, so it blew a whole bunch off. So I'm like, crap, and I got to do it again. So you know, here we go, round 3, and I think I glued the tip closed. So there we go, and I'm just going to put a few drops there, and I just take what I've spilled off, pile that on, close that up so I don't knock any more off. I'll recover the spillage later, and this time I learned, spray higher, knock off the loose stuff. Alright, starting to look promising at this point. And then we move on to washing. So I take a, I think it's a medium wash, brown wash, and I just squirt it all over the place. And then I'm going to take a acid brush, or you know, just one of those disposable Dollar General's metal brushes, and with soft bristles, and I just tamp it down. Try and smooth it out without knocking a whole bunch of the grains off the model itself. And I can see I had some stuck there, but I obviously missed the grain, because if you look in the final photo, you still see a bit of the grit stuck to the base of his coat. So I just go work with that through. It's going to bring in some shading, and you know, it's going to give some different tones to the soil and the rocks. So again, I'm not happy with the results of the super glue on the base, even with the activator, so I definitely won't be using it again. I'm very particular about my terrain basing, and I just don't like the super glue. I don't think the time saving of anything is any beneficial. So after I let it sit for a little bit, as you can see, that little red in his hand is supposed to simulate the sponge, or not the sponge, but the flame of a lighter or a match in this case. And what it is actually a very, very tiny piece of a packing sponge from a miniatures case that I soaked in a red contrast paint and then glued to his hand, because I lost the definition of the match or lighter. And I think it provides a little nice contrast when standing out. So here again, I'm trying to highlight the British soldier's face after the Nun oil disaster. And then here I'm taking a light beige and highlighting the sand and rocks to provide, again, some more definition. And remember, everything dries a little darker than it goes on. So while this looks pretty bright, it will nicely tone down a little bit, as we'll see here shortly. So as you can see, I still have quite a few bare spots on this base, and still some loose gravel. So as I work my brush around, I get the loose stuff off there. And now I'm going to the Games and Gears Desert Tufts. These are little stick-on static grass tufts. So I put them on. I did notice I had a problem with them, and I don't think it's Games and Gears in particular. I think it's any tufts. There wasn't enough surface area for the adhesive to stick to, so I had trouble with them sticking. So I probably should have used a little bit of glue on some of these. As you can see, my tweezers were still wet from the sponge being soaked in the red contrast paint to bring out that flame. But that's okay, because we're going to fix that here shortly. And I'm just working myself around, finding bare spots, and working through. As you can see, they're not sticking as well as they normally do. Again, because I don't have a lot of surface area for the adhesive to stick to. So I just tamp it down the best I can, and I get different sizes, because there's big ones, small ones, mediums, different, you know, size tufts to use. And, you know, nature's not uniform, so make sure you do different size rocks, different size vegetation, and work yourself through it. And then just find spots that, you know, the gravel didn't adhere to, And then you can use these tufts, and you can see this one just does not want to stick. So, and I'm pushing down, I'm like, okay. And then, you know, of course my tweezers were still a little tacky. So I take another small one and I put it there to give it different definition and height, and you can see it just won't stick. So I'm like, you know, pushing down with my finger, I can't get it to adhere. So I think I toss this one away and get a new one. Thankfully, we had quite a bit of these tufts. If I really was industrious, I would have gone with my static grass machine and just static grassed it. But I think I used a little glue in the end to adhere that one too. Now I'm using this Secret Weapon yellow weathering powder just to give everything an overall dusting. Because it's the desert, everything's going to be covered in dust and sand. As you can see, it gives it a nice coating and a nice dusting. It gives everything like, you know, you're definitely out in the desert, right? And everything's covered in sand and the dust from the sand being out in the desert. So I'm just working it through, and I'm rubbing it into the rocks and the vegetation, and I'm just working it in and working it in. And just take your time, you know, use a clean, dry brush, work it in. Let it do its job. You can see that vegetation's still not sticking very well, but that's okay. And actually, by pushing down on your finger with it helps the vegetation take on different shapes instead of a perfectly like round shape. So it gives the vegetation a little bit of variety of shapes and makes it look a little bit more natural. So I really thought the weathering powder was an excellent idea. It really brings out the feeling of it being dusty. So here I have done the matte varnish from test stores, and then here's the finished product. I thought it turned out good. Everything looks dusty, and there you go, guys.